When Susan invited me, she asked me to talk about human rights in Mexico, which is easy and difficult. Easy because there are so many violations of human rights that you could easily choose any one of them and spend 1 or 2 hours discussing the specific details. What I decided was to take the right to free and fair elections as the guiding argument, and then at the end to link that with security, and in the process to discuss the questions of billionaires. So it seems that the issues are separate, but as a matter of fact, I argue that they are very interconnected. Mexico ended almost a century of authoritarian rule by a single party in 2000, the year 2000, and we have the first ever president that came from a different party, Vicente Fox. So I will start. I don't have the time to go into the details about the past, but I will go into the question of what is the inheritance of Vicente Fox. Is it true that he was an irrelevant, inefficient president? Or did he did something to change Mexico? The question is very broad, but what I argue, and I'm going to present to you bits of information of a new book that I am finishing, which is about the question of democracy and human rights, and related to free and fair elections, to democracy. What I argue is that he didn't plan it, but he was able to make a silent revolution in Mexico, in the sense that he was instrumental by his inaction in redistributing power in ways that nobody anticipated. So I'm going to start to show some of the slides that will give you an idea of this redistribution of power. So let's start with the myth of the imperial presidency. No, I think it's have to go to the number one. No, I don't know. Yes, can you please put number one? Slide number one. Yes. There is a belief that Mexico is a presidentialist country. It was. But during the 6 years of Fox, there was a massive redistribution within the government. There was a massive redistribution of power within the government. I put in this table the increases and reductions in the budget. And as you know, budgets are a clear indicator of power within the bureaucracy. So the judicial and the legislative increased their power during those 6 years, especially the judiciary, that increased its budget 146%, remarkable, which is what is going on in Mexico. I mean, power was taken away from the president and given to the judicial system and to Congress. Then the next 4 offices. Under the old regime, the president controlled the country mainly through 3 ministries: defense, security, the treasury, economics, gobernación, which was the interior, and the presidency, which had the power that controlled everything. Defense increased its budget in a normal way, 25%, treasury only 21%, the presidency only 11%, which is very low. But it gives an idea of how modest the increase in power, it gives an idea of the decrease in power if you compare this figure with the other ones. And then Interior or Gobernación decreased its budget by almost 50%. So this is just a simple indicator of what happened inside the government. Slide number 2. A revolution nevertheless happened in the transfer of money to the states. There was a massive transfer of funds, federal funds. 30% of the federal budget is transferred every year. And that means that billions of dollars are transferred every year. And that has created a new phenomenon, which is very normal in Brazil, perhaps, but not in Mexico. The governors, the power of the governors. And in Mexico now, governors have become a new factor of power. They are not dependent on the president anymore. They have their own agendas, especially because the money that is spent at the local level in the states is not oversight as the federal budget is. I estimated that there are different studies about half of the federal budget, half of the money sent by the federal government to the states are not controlled, are not accountable. So in the case of the state of Mexico, just to give you an idea, about $3 billion were not controlled by no one. And that explains why governors have become so powerful. One of the indicators. Third, please. Then let's take income distribution. Here you have, instead of leaving the 10%, I put them in 20%, because it's easier to present. And what is more remarkable is how little change income distribution of the poorest sectors of the population in the 6 years of the Fox administration. There was not really any increase in the income, in the monetary income of poor people. 5 pesos a year. It was the increase in the poorest 20% of the population. 20 pesos a year of the next 20%. So it is irrelevant. We have still, after 7 years of a new party in power, we still have the same problem of an extremely unequal income distribution, and that is going to have an impact on many levels: migration to the US, increasing the power of the drug cartels, and so on and so forth. Next one. The next figure gives you an idea of the crony capitalism in Mexico. In Mexico, the state was the strongest actor in the past. When privatization came with the Carlos Salinas regime, then the number and the wealth, the number of billionaires and the wealth of billionaires started to increase dramatically. These figures are taken from Forbes magazine, which is the only source of information about billionaires, about Mexican billionaires. And Forbes started to its list on 1987. In 1988, there was only one family in Mexico with a fortune of $2 billion from Nuevo León, Garzazada. When the Carlos Salinas regime ended, there were 24 individuals or families with a fortune of $44 billion. When Vicente Fox administration ended and the Felipe Calderón began, there were only 10 billionaires with a fortune of $84 billion. Among them, the richest man in the world, Carlos Slim, who himself owns $56 billion. All those fortunes, or most of those fortunes, were done under the protection of the federal government because they received the concessions of the the former public monopolies like the telephone company was transferred to private hands. And they keep the monopoly working. So I can give you an example. I have a contract here in the US that cost me for a cell phone that cost me about $30 a month. For the same kind of services, about 1,000 minutes, I have to pay in Mexico $210. All that is the surplus that I have to pay to the private monopoly of Mr. Carlos Slim that is protected by the government because consumers are not protected in Mexico. The institutions the governmental institutions that exist to protect the consumers do a very lousy job. So we still have, after this first sexennium with the different foreign power, the inequality in income. Very few rich people, a huge mass of poor people, and that will have an impact in the phenomenon I'm going to explain. The next, please. The power of organized crime. At the beginning of Felipe Calderón, it controlled 40% of the territory with 24 million Mexicans. I'm going to come back to that later, so I'll stop here. I will give you more information. I'm going to expand this slide. Please continue. The wealth of political parties. Part of the problem in Mexico, the political problem, is the corruption of political parties. All political parties have become prisoners of a system that transfers to them fortunes every year. And I put here an example. Political parties receive in the year 2000 about $400 million from public funds, federal and state funds. And on 2006, they received $570 million. It is an increase, and what is more important, I didn't estimate the percentages, is that the state transfers of money are growing at a higher speed, at a higher rate than federal money, because governors have more money to give to the political parties. This has created a triple corrupting effect in political parties. It has created bureaucracies that receive relatively good salaries, and I can give you now some examples. And they have the key to access to public office, which is extremely well paid in Mexico. Not as in Brazil, perhaps, but it's very, very well paid. And I can give you an example in figures. A university professor earns about $2,000 a month. If he or she is a party leader, he earns about $4,000. If he is part of the local government, not federal government, mid-sized city like Cuernavaca, he earns $10,000 a month. Therefore, we have created a bureaucracy in the parties that has a vested interest in the preservation of this corrupt system and is not representing the interest of the people. So there is a growing alienation of the common citizen vis-a-vis political parties. Let's move to political rights. The foundation of a democratic society is the respect for the vote, the right to free and fair elections. It's a founding right. If you have that right, if you respect that right, then a number of other rights can be respected. Mexico has a very long tradition of electoral process. I included here the four presidential elections that are it is accepted, were fraudulent, 1929, 1940, 1952, 1988. I don't have the time to go into detailed comparison, but I want to go to the question that is dividing, has divided Mexico, and is dividing Mexico still. Was there an electoral fraud in 2006? 50% of the population will say no, it was a clean election. 40% of the population will answer yes, there were irregularities, even perhaps an electoral fraud. Nobody really knows for sure what happened in that election, because, believe it or not, one of the underdeveloped fields of inquiry, academic inquiry in Mexico, are electoral frauds. We should have PhDs. Full professorships, a chair in every university. I'm not joking. Electoral fraud has been so central to our political system, to our culture. It has permeated so much. It has injected so much our culture with corruption, because Mexican society is very tolerant with corruption. Opinion polls are very clear about that. We are not perhaps a corrupt society. That's an open debate. I don't think we are corrupt, but we tolerate corruption, because we have learned throughout a century of electoral frauds that you can't do nothing with an electoral fraud. So, the tragedy of 2006 has to do not with the fact of who won the election, and I don't want to enter into that debate with Felipe Calderón or López Obrador. The tragedy was that the opposition party that made free and fair elections its banner throughout since 1939, when the National Action Party was created, when it conquered power, presidential power, tolerated the irregularities that I am going to present to you now. I could give you the variables that, because I have studied this electoral fraud, and I have made a number of variables that I'm going to measure. I have measured 2006 with these other elections to see if they fit or not fit. I won't have the time to go into detailed analysis because it will take me so long. So I will go in a very fast way through the election to show you one or 2 points. Let me just tell you two differences of 2006, three differences from the other elections. One, nobody was killed, which is something. From 1929, hundreds were killed. 1988, dozens people were killed. In 2006, nobody was killed. Second, we have access to information as never before. I have a team of 6 assistants working in the process of information about that election, and it's amazing on the amounts of tons of facts, hard facts about that election that can be found. And the third innovation in 2006 is negative campaigning, of which the U.S. is master in, as you know. Let's move to a quick overview of that election. These are the results of that election. 0.5% of the vote was the difference. Only 233,000 votes. So any irregularity can account for that small difference. That's one factor. Second, please. Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the leftist mayor of Mexico City, the leader, the populist leader according to some, the hope for the poor according to others, had been leading opinion polls for 2 years, 10 points. He was 10 points ahead of everybody since 2004. January 2006, he was ahead 10 points of Felipe Calderón, then Madrazo, 26 points, and the others are irrelevant in numerical terms. So January of 2006, the 10 points lead. Next one. Now I'm going to give you, go back and let's start with the spots. With media. Let me go. No, it's, yes, the spots. The one of Ladrillos. The number one. Yes. This is the first spot transmitted on on February 2006. Felipe Calderón decided, I'm going to lose. And the only way, we have the interview he gave to Salvador Camarena, so we know that he decided, I have to get advantage of the expertise of Spaniards and Americans, and he hired Dick Morris and Antonio Solá, two experts on negative campaigning. And on March 12th, the National Action Party transmitted nationally this spot.
Este es el segundo piso de la ciudad. ¿Cómo pagó López Obrador por él? Se endeudó. Las pensiones se endeudó. Triplicó la deuda del DF. Si llega a presidente, no se endeudará más y tendrá una crisis económica, devaluación, desempleo. Estos son los grandes planes de López Obrador. Un peligro para México.
A danger to Mexico. I'll go back later to negative campaigning, to the question of timings and all that. The number two, this was aired 6 days later, March 16, 4 days later. Spot number 3. I'm sorry to bother you.
Calderón, con tus manos sucias, firmaste junto al PRI el fraude de la historia, el Fobaproa, 120 mil millones de dólares de deuda. Nos prometiste justicia. Seguiremos con las auditorías para que no solo se castigue a los responsables, sino que devuelvan el dinero, y sigues encubriendo a los culpables. No te importaron los más de 1 millón de trabajadores despedidos sin piedad. Calderón, eres muy
mentiroso. That was I have to compliment. And number 4, this was.
Y si te digo que una devaluación de 20 pesos no es una validez.
¿Qué estás diciendo, verdad? Aquí dice 20 pesos. ¿Qué estás bronceando?
Let's analyze this. We were innocent, naive on negative campaigning. Never before in Mexican history this kind of spots have been used on a presidential campaign. That does not mean that the authoritarian regime did not use rumors and defamation to discredit opposition leaders. But it was done in a different way, not with the spots. I know that for Americans, and I have discussed this with them, say, well, that's normal, that's freedom of speech. And perhaps that's the case, although there are other democracies in Europe that does not allow this kind of campaigning. The question is that the problem in Mexico is that these 4 spots were illegal, were forbidden by law. They could not be aired. And yet, the 2 first spots that started to air on March 12 and 16, March 12 and 18, I'm sorry, 6 days later, stay on the air for 2 months and 11 days. Because the electoral authority, the IFE, tolerated them. They refused to take them out of national television, arguing that it was freedom of speech. They took the American thesis. Well, because that's part of your tradition. I mean, this is not part of a Mexican tradition, so I don't want to discuss if it's right or wrong. It had to go the case to the electoral tribunal that ruled that it was illegal and that it was to be taken out, the first 2. In the case of the third one, that was the spot from the left, from the PRD against Calderon, and it was only allowed to be transmitted 18 days. The last one was a spot transmitted by a private organization, a businessman organization, the most important business organization, which is also illegal. No private company can put this kind of money into political campaign. So for the left, that was one of the reasons why the electoral authorities were partial, were in favor of Calderon. There were many other examples. So, an opinion poll showed that no Mexican liked these spots, but they were very effective. They worked. Let's see the next PowerPoint slide, please. These were the consequences of the spots. Look at they aired in March. In April, the fall of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, 35%. Felipe Calderón, 38%. There were many other factors. I'm oversimplifying. I am not saying that the spots were the only cause, but it was a very important cause for the drop in the preferences for the president. This is only one of the many irregularities that occurred during 2006. I could give you a lot more, but that explains why about 40% of the population believe that it was an election characterized by irregularities. What were the consequences of 2006? Insecurity increased. Guerrillas start to regroup and react. In 2007, there were a number of terrorist acts against oil pipelines, gas pipelines, with major consequences. There was also a breakdown within Mexico. We are divided. We are still divided. No matter what they tell you, opinion poll after opinion poll show that we are divided on fundamental issues and on the question of what kind of democracy we want. there are all sorts of opinions, but this is a New Mexico. Perhaps it is better. I don't know. Before going to security, which is related in a way, let's look at the final PowerPoint. Go down, all the way to the end. Oh, there should be, yes. This is an opinion poll that has not been released. So you are privileged to see these figures. It was, a friend of mine, Roy Campos from Mitowski, allowed me to use these figures for an opinion piece and for this presentation. He asked the perception of fraud in December 2007, just a few weeks ago. He asked, if the elections were held today, how clean would they be? 29% answered very clean. 69% answered not clean or fraudulent. Even panistas, 50% of panistas believe that the elections would be fraudulent. That's the impact, perception of an illegitimate election. So, I'll try to be very fast now, but what all this has to do with security? Well, as part of the redistribution of power within the Fox administration, he allowed drug cartels to become extremely powerful. So, in December of 2006, when Felipe Calderón became president, he announced that he will launch a war against crime, organized crime. So I will show you the speech he gave on February 10, 2007 in the Navy. And then I will start to give you some figures so you can have a nice dreams. Calderón.
O rescatamos a México o cancelamos un futuro de prosperidad que merecen los hijos de todos los mexicanos. Y por muy grande que sea, y vamos a utilizar toda la fuerza del Estado para responder a quienes desafían a la autoridad y a la sociedad, a responder a quienes retan a las instituciones y ponen en peligro el futuro del país. Hablando de recuperaremos la seguridad en Guerrero, en Michoacán, en Baja California, en Sinaloa, en Chihuahua, en Durango, en Tamaulipas, en Nuevo León y en toda región del país que esté amenazada por el crimen organizado. Ese es el enemigo.
He only missed Texas and Illinois from that list, it seems. He said at the beginning of his speech, we will rescue Mexico. Who kidnapped Mexico? The language can be very powerful. He was very clear. He named 8 states. So what I did, that was not for this book, it was part of another exercise, another book that has already been published on security. What I did, I contrasted the rhetoric with the figures, or I used the rhetoric to have an idea of the dimension of the threat. So now, can we go back to the PowerPoint? I'm sorry. To this map. Exactly. This is the power of the organized crime in Mexico, according to the president. Not according to any troublemaker, scholar, or whatever, columnist. But according to the president, these are the parts of the country that have to be rescued, including Durango, the hometown of Jesus Garcia. It's remarkable, isn't it? Why is so powerful the organized crime? This has to be, it's a question of money. These are all estimates given by official authorities, different official authorities. Sales in Mexico, $10 billion. 250,000 individuals work for drug cartels selling drugs in the streets. The biggest employer, private employer, and most successful, they are not in Social Security, but they are given fringe benefits. $10 billion for the exports to the US. Equal. We have the same problem at home now, and the money we are earning for exporting to the US, or they are earning for exporting to the US. And then the annual profits of for the Americans or whoever who traffic guns to Mexico, $9 billion. So it's an estimated $29 billion a year that is being moved by these groups. Let's take illegal weapons in more detail. According to a small arms survey, in 2004 there were between 3.5 and 16.5 million illegal weapons in Mexico. So it means that, I don't know what is the percentage in the US. I think we are still lower than that, but there is a lot of illegal weapons floating around Mexico. Second, during the Vicente Fox term, according to official figures, 4.3 million weapons were exported to Mexico in the 12,000 sale and distribution points in the US side of the border. Then I asked the different offices how many weapons had been captured. Only 29,000 weapons have been seized by the federal authorities. The Army, Navy, the Attorney General Office, all federal police, all federal, the whole security apparatus only was able to seize 29,000 weapons. Army deserters. The Army is training the hitmen of the drug cartels. Almost 250,000 deserters in 12 years. 237,000. These are official figures from the Army. Nobody knows how many of them went to work for the drug cartels. What we know is that a soldier earned during the Fox years $300 a month, and a hitman earned $3,000 a month, 10 times more money. So you have a country of poor people with no income. Either you sell drugs, it's the only job being created, I mean, with relative good income, because jobs have been created in Mexico, but salaries are lousy. It is offensive. One of the worst violations in Mexico have to do with labor rights. And some generals have accepted that they know that the bars surrounding the army barracks receive the visit of the scouts of the drug cartels that are looking for the best and the bravest, not the brightest, but the bravest within the army to hire them, to fight for them. The next one, please. Therefore, executions. This 2007 is only until July. I didn't have the time to correct. But look how it is increasing the executions due to drug-related activities from 1,200 to about 2,300 in 2007, and this year is hitting records. I mean, every day you look at the papers, 6, 10, 12, 20 are killed in different parts of the country. For a single reason, for a very simple reason. They are fighting for the markets. Not only for the routes to export to the US. Now, the bitter fights are for the control of the markets because we have become a country of consumers. And the tragedy is that the government has not produced the information to have a clear view of what is the size of the threat, what are the dimensions of the security threat to Mexico. What we know is that the drug cartels are infiltrating politics, local politics. In those 8 states, they have been able to put their people as chief of police and chief of transit, of the traffic, because those are the 2 positions that they carry. These are the ones that are important for business. I think this is the last one. Let's see if it's the last one. Yes. I could continue on and on with implications this has for human rights. Just let me finish by giving you a clear connection. It is not the only one. President Calderon did not have other option. He had to send the army. Because these figures can give you an idea of how powerful drug cartels have become. And because he wanted to gain some legitimacy after the elections. There were two of the reasons. Those were 2 of the reasons. But the army was not trained to respect human rights in Mexico. Not in the US, not in democracies, as we know by all the evidence in Iraq and everywhere. Soldiers are trained to kill, period. They are educated to do that. They are not educated to respect the life of people. That's not part of the code of honor or the code of conduct. So we have now a problem because soldiers are committing abuses and are crossing the boundaries, the legal boundaries, in a very dangerous road. For example, they are now in Tijuana, which is a hotspot. They are aiding or distributing some leaflets asking people to denounce anonymously to the army. But the problem is that according to our law, the only institution allowed to take accusations are the Ministerio Público. I don't know how you translate Ministerio Público. I mean, it's part of the legal scheme. So the army is trespassing, is crossing the boundaries, the legal boundaries. And there have been some cases of assassinations of civilians that does not stop at roadblocks that are unconstitutional, and so on and so forth. So we are, at this moment, a country with doubts about the legitimacy of elections, that does not trust elections, and the figures are clear, that feels not secure because the government is not giving protection, that is bitter because we are a poor society, and because the road to the US is being closed, and the road to the US agricultural exports is being opened. So in 2008 we will have the double impact of a closing door and an open wall that will allow basic agricultural exports to Mexico. And in the middle of that turmoil, we have human rights that are being the victims, the logical victims of this kind of situation, in which still, I don't want to sound very pessimistic, because I think there are some spaces to work and there are some reasons, some grounds to be relatively optimistic about the future. But it is not going to be an easy task, and I believe that on 2000 we have crossed the threshold, because at last we had a credible, free and fair election, presidential election that was free and fair, 2000. And but the blow that was given by the irregularities committed by all the actors, but especially by the conservative right, because that's the evidence I have, the conservative right was the one who committed the most important violations, that has created a difficult situation that is, I think we will muddle through, but it will take still years for things to settle down and to advance somehow to a more democratic society in which human rights are respected. And for that, the challenge and the task lies in the hands of the people, citizens, because we cannot expect much from political parties, the government, drug cartels, billionaires. They are not there to help the people. They are there to extract wealth from the people and from the country, of course, the natural resources of the country. I think I sounded a bit pessimistic. I was trying to get a way out, but the way how I built the speech, I think, no, it's not a speech, the conference does not allow me to end with it. I'm sorry, I cannot be optimistic. Thank you.